Four, three, two, and one. Ladies and gentlemen, episode 36 of the Art of Move podcast. Thank you for joining us live if you're watching us live, and thank you for listening to us on iTunes or Spotify if you're listening to us on another podcast streaming platform. Today, Dr. Will and I are going to be talking about the ankle quite a bit. We're going to be talking about some nuances between ankle eversion and the biomechanical action of what Goda calls inside ankle bone high. There's a little bit of a discrepancy there that we wanted to kind of explore. We're going to be talking about bows and bow-leggedness a little bit, but mostly we're going to be talking a lot about the ankle structure. We're going to be talking about the biomechanical actions at the ankle. And I really wanted to talk about this because I think when a lot of people get going with a movement practice like Goda, the assumption is inside ankle bone high means for you to bend your ankle towards the outside edge of your foot. You almost kind of blade your feet out. And inside ankle bone high is so much more of a nuanced biomechanical action than that. And you kind of understand that gradually over time. I think to me, the reason that inside ankle bone high is even one of the principles of Goda is because it promotes using the fourth and fifth metatarsal as a pivot point versus other points of the foot. It's just the most efficient place for you to spiral energy off in the gait cycle versus ankle eversion is an actual, bending of the entire ankle joint towards that outside blade edge of the foot. What do you think?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there, but okay. So ankle inversion can be done. There's two joints, right? Like there's the joint, which is the ankle mortise, meaning where the talus meets the tibia. So the top of the joint. Okay. And then there's the bottom of that joint, and that's where the talus meets the calcaneus. Okay. Most of the lateral movement that you get from the ankle comes from the bottom if you're talking heel only. Let's say you're standing on your heel. Okay. And that's another thing. It's like if you're measuring from standing on your heel, it's different from when you're moving. Okay. But back to the original point, when you're standing on your heel can turn inverted. So we're towards the midline at below the talus where it meets the calcaneus. Okay. So most of the sideways motion comes from there, and most of the back and forth motion comes from the top, from the actual ankle rocker, from the mortise where it meets the tibia, where the talus and tibia meet. Okay. That's the linear model of things. Okay. And that's why we should unpack why the ankle is more like a ball and socket versus a traditional hinge joint. That's the real kind of juicy debate going on right now. Is the ankle acting more like a ball and socket because of the combinations of the joints moving, the ankle mortise, the subtalar joint, the where the navicular meets the talus, and where the talus meets the cuboid. All of those are acting as you hit the ground, and the metatarsals too. All of those are acting as you hit the ground to have a cumulative effect that can't be described in a linear model. It has to be described in more of a rotary combination model. And it's an observational thing, right? It's like, how do you describe something that's moving in so many planes at once, and none of them can be described in a single plane that exists in the language? Okay, so that's kind of it. Is the ankle a ball and socket joint, or is it a linear hinge slash lateral to medial joint?
Right. And, a lot of the debate that I see is people who practice Goda and who observe movement say that it's a behavioral thing, right? Anatomists, people who study anatomy, physiotherapists, people who study the actual anatomical structure of the joint, they'll be like, oh, it's a hinging joint, right? And you just explain the hinging action. You explain the anatomy of it. I have the image of that ankle joint complex here right now, and you can see how it connects in different ways. It's funny because it looks even the navicular surface here into the navicular looks like a ball and socket. Like if you just look at the the actual image here, that looks like a round edge going into a socket to
Well,
me,
just
just
take a
looking blind at it.
take a look at, just if we're looking at only what it looks like here. Imagine
Mm-hmm.
it was completely round, and the whole thing was articular surface. it's not that far off of that. You know what I mean? There's points where, there's ridges, so it's not completely a ball and socket. Um, I don't think that claim is there that it's completely a ball and socket, but it acts like it because there is so much articular surface within the actual talus. Now, it is locked in from the medial to lateral malleolus, like the fibula and the tibia lock in the top of the talus, so it doesn't go much side to side at the top, right? It does more of a back and forth rocker motion according to the linear model. However, I can grab my own talus and move it side to side. There's still some motion there. And it's more like it literally is more like a gyroscope when you feel it. Okay. Now, there's different mechanics within closed and open chain, meaning your foot on the ground versus your foot hanging. I can go through and describe the model, but basically, I don't think there is an accurate description now because it does act more like a gyroscope. It is always a combination of the subtalar joint acting with the ankle mortise, okay, the joint at the top, and they're always in combination. Okay, so I don't think the linear description models really can describe. I think the ball and socket is a much better description than the linear model gives credit.
And even if it's not anatomically an actual ball and socket, they're describing the ranges of motion that it moves through, right? Saying, foot pronation and foot supination and eversion and even dorsiflexion and dorsiflexion. Like these are things. These are all like uniplanar sort of descriptions of something that can move in such a broad range of motion in such a rotary fashion, right? So the issue is we're kind of debating at this point um, behavioral priorities, right? Because in the model of the heel to toe striking gait model, where you start at the heel or the midfoot and you extend and you push off the big toe and you take advantage of that windlass mechanism by creating tension and recoil off of that plantar fascia, then the idea of the foot more as a hinge kind of makes a little bit of sense with a little bit of aversion or a little bit of pronation happening so that you can push off of that big toe. That kind of makes sense if you're describing the anatomical structure of the foot in that sense. And again, that's sort of it's the idea of you're reverse engineering it based on the anatomical structure. When you're actually observing movement and you're actually observing people pivoting off of this fourth and fifth metatarsal, because in the art of move, we're assuming a rotary model of gait mechanics. We're seeing, the fascia spirals. Yeah. We're trying to understand it more in depth, and we're trying to understand the actual basis for it. But when you observe movement, it seems like the best movers in the world, or in the most natural movers in the world, the people who are untouched by the modern trappings of civilization, tend to have a rotary model of gait, as in they're pivoting off of that fourth and fifth metatarsal. Their inside ankle bones are high, meaning that weight is in the fourth and fifth metatarsal, and their gait mechanics start spiraling. Am I missing anything there?
No, you're describing everything completely fine, right? I was gonna say it's less observing range of motion and more observing behavior. What comes to mind is a post by a guy on Instagram at Movement Observer, and it's somebody really stopping fast on a lateral shift. Let's see if you can find it here. I'll tell you which one it is. It's not that one.
No,
It's not that one. It's another one before that, much before that. Scroll down, and I'll let you know which one it is. Keep going. Anyway, he stomps down, and it's showing the nuance of the ankle, right? That one's more showing the bow. It's much before that. But basically, the person is cutting laterally. It's a running back or something like that, right? And he's cutting laterally, he's hitting the ground, and the ankle is doing many motions at once. You can see it in slow motion. Keep going down. It's not that one. You can see many things happening at once at the ankle. I'll tell you when it's there. It's that one right there in the middle. In the middle, go up.
This one?
Yeah, that one. That one, yeah. Okay, so.
Oh yeah. When you see the slow motion, you can see the shock wave going all the way up the leg too. It's crazy.
It's wild. But how do you describe that coming down? He's obviously funneling his energy out of the lateral portion of his ankle. And the very important part is that the ankle bone is climbing as the power is being applied. That is the biggest takeaway. Ankle bone climbs as power is being applied. If it's sinking as the power is being applied, you have a problem, okay, in this model, in the rotary model. So if you look at this, how do you describe that in the linear model, in the cadaver model, in the current way to describe it? There's so many things going on at once in one single motion that you can only see in slow motion, and you can barely make out what's happening, right? So all I can describe here is that it is acting like a gyroscope. It is acting more like a ball and socket. And he's funneling the energy to the outside of his foot. In terms of cueing somebody, that's all we need to do. That's all I need to say, right? Like, in terms of observing it, I'm observing a gyroscope, or like energy being pivoted towards the outside or being funneled towards the outside, and the ankle bone climbing. And the bow of the leg is shock absorbing. Okay, so I don't know what else to say about this one. It can't be described in a linear model.
Right. And there's quite a few debates about this right now. I'm gonna try and find the post. By the way, guys, we do this live on nofilter.net, and we're currently doing a share screen. We're trying to specifically, pull up video. So if you want to watch the video replay of this, or you want to watch us do these live, it's on nofilter.net, and it's much more visual when you're able to do this. But what do you think? Do you think there are any good arguments for the ankle not being a gyroscope or not being a ball and socket joint, other than the pure anatomical structure?
Absolutely. The way it's being viewed now is the way I was taught. And there's only one real major model for this, other than what Goda has presented. The inside ankle bone high, the pivot point, and that model. It's all the same model. Almost everybody I've seen uses it, and that is the energy being funneled out of the big toe. The dome of the arch is ideally collapsing, but only in a controlled manner, and only the perfect stride would be just out of the big toe and nothing else. And then you resupinate, you bring your foot back up and do it again. So it's more of like a slap down perfectly, and that's absorbing the energy. And the windlass mechanism's helping you out.
When you're slapping it down, what part of the foot is absorbing the energy in that model? Is it the soft tissue?
Well, you're still rolling from the outside to the inside. I think everybody agrees that you're starting off on the outside. It's just what happens there. So there's no rotary model in the current structure. Okay. The current major model, there's no mention of rotary, which is funny because the heel usually pivots in or pivots out. So there is rotation there. Everyone knows that. It's just like, where is it actually coming from? Okay. Is it coming at the hip level? Is it coming from another level? That aside, it's going from the fifth metatarsal, the energy, out the big toe. And that's where you're really pushing off of. So the problem there for me, one is the big toe, you're rolling off sesamoid bones. Those are two super small bones underneath your big toe, underneath your first metatarsal head. And you're expected to funnel energy, your whole body weight, repetitively underneath those sesamoid bones. That doesn't sit well with me. The fact that there's no rotary component in the linear model, in the current model, is a problem for me, since I observe rotation in slow motion. And the thing is, there is a dome collapse in the current model where the arch collapses for a brief moment, and then it reshapes as the muscles pull from the top, okay? Or the top being at the calf level. Okay, the shin and the calf are controlling like a puppet the foot. And in the current model, rolling from the fifth onto the big toe, those muscles get stretched out. And then at the very end, ideally, they pull back and recreate the arch. And your windlass mechanism, your soft tissues also help that bounce at the bottom.
Right. And we talk about utilizing elastic recoil to make movement more efficient. However, there are some biomechanical issues with using, just the elastic recoil of your plantar fascia to propel yourself in locomotion. What do you think those issues would be?
Um, well, I just don't think it's accurate. One, but two, so the windlass mechanism is the fascial recoil at the bottom of the foot. We know that, but the actual model at the calf level, at the shin level, is that the muscles elongate. I've heard this from PRI guys. The muscles elongate, and they need to be at their most elongated state in order for them to contract back to their shortened state, and that's what creates that drop in the arch, and then that drop, at that maximal elongated state at those muscles, it pops back. Okay, that's the ideal stride there. So you're going on to the big toe, muscles are elongating, off the big toe, muscles shorten. That's the argument there. That doesn't sit well with me. That's not really a fascial model. That's a muscle elongation model. Doesn't work in my
Interesting.
book. Yeah,
Right.
and the rotary model makes a lot more sense to me when I watch people absorb motion. Okay, so like the best absorbers, watch parkour guys. They'll always roll out of something. They never just like
Mhm.
bang and land. Maybe an untrained person does that, but all the parkour guys who do it, jump 20 feet over on and 15, 20 feet down, they have to roll out of it. So it
Yeah.
makes sense to me that it's a
So
pivot point. I feel it. That's the difference
I
too. I
I
feel
actually used to do parkour before I got into training, like before I got into weightlifting and before I got into anything else. When I was a kid, I would watch these videos of these Russian dudes doing crazy free running in parkour, and I noticed they were all rolling, and I noticed they were either all rolling or they were landing in these like deep squats and like having like this kind of elastic bouncing through their hips as their knees go really wide, basically absorbing force into a bow, right? And I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't have any understanding of the human body back then. This is before I started my training journey. I was still in high school when I was doing this, but me and a friend would go and we would literally climb buildings, and like I would do 22-foot drops off of buildings. Like I would jump off buildings and land in a roll and not hurt myself. And
wow.
I would do these big long jumps off of these big like drop offs as well, and train myself to stop on these little platforms before falling off the next ledge by absorbing this force into a bow without knowing exactly what I was doing. But it was funny. We would take about like 20 minutes to warm up, just jumping off a 3-foot drop and figuring out how to roll forward off your shoulder. But eventually you got this intuitive sense of what direction your energy was moving. So we would almost jump off to the side a little bit so that we could funnel it off in through over our shoulder. And it's funny because you would funnel this energy off and you'd get out of a roll, and sometimes we'd like jump back up because our forward moving momentum was so strong that it would like flip us back up after we rolled, after taking some of these like 16 to 20-foot drops. It's it's basically how efficiently can it doesn't matter how much force there is, it's how can you pass it off. And that's martial art like judo, for example, is using another person's force against them and just moving with that energy to propel it forward faster without absorbing that force yourself. This is the same idea. Your body is a mechanism that is uniquely designed to know how to do that, to not have to absorb these forces in the tissues, in the bones, in the joints.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You can see it in application. People who have to absorb all the time, like parkour athletes, they have to
Hmm.
display these bow shapes, right? Simone Biles comes to mind actually. If
Mhm.
you watch gymnastics, if you watch Simone Biles, you'll see bows like crazy bows. It's pretty amazing. Now, I mean,
Yeah.
some people are argue, oh, that's probably just how she's born, and then because uh, she was born with those hip angles, she can be better at gymnastics, and because there's a huge population of people, there's that argument. I think that she created these bows from a young age, and they kept with. That's just a observation there, but you can see in it as she's moving here. Oh, actually, she landed in two corners there. That's interesting.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that. Well,
Yeah,
that's a gymnastics landing standard, right? That's not her
yeah.
necessarily landing. You got to understand with gymnasts too, sometimes when you're landing on a soft surface, you're outsourcing the absorption of force into these pads, right?
Yeah. You can
But if
really
you
see
look
the
at
bow
her,
when she's sorry.
when she's going off of the harder surfaces, you can see her springing off her bowing mechanics are really, really solid when she's doing that.
When she's doing the
Obviously she's
flip.
doing artistic gymnastics as well, right? So she has to land with her legs narrow for stylistic points.
Yeah, true. No, all this looks great, right? Like, in midair, if you were to slow this down, you would see bows everywhere, bows and corners everywhere, right?
Well,
So
what's nice about YouTube is we can actually change the playback speed too.
yeah, it's funny because when you start watching things, like 0.25 is not even slow enough.
I know
There,
it's
right
not.
there, there's a bow right there, right? Like
Mm-hmm. This
inside
is
ankle bone high
literally
all
this
over
is a
the place.
video literally called Simone Biles nailing landings for 3 minutes straight. I love
Look
I
at the
love the
fetal
internet.
tuck, fetal tuck, boom. The landing is pretty interesting. I guess they can't roll out of a landing in gymnastics, right?
No, well, and that's why
Yeah,
all the mats are super thick. You're outsourcing that. You're actually outsourcing absorption of force into thick absorbent mats for gymnastics when you're doing landings, which is why
for sure.
she can get. But you can see how deep her bowing action is as she's getting ready to do these like intense handsprings.
Yeah.
Um,
So I'm seeing inside ankle bone high everywhere. I'm seeing bows and corners everywhere. It would have to be slower than 0.25 to like point all it out. But
mhm,
you can see that inside ankle bone behavior even in her open chain feet. Okay. So, like, that's another thing. When your foot is in the back, not on the ground, you're in open chain, right? So it's swinging back behind you as you're running. Uh, Having that ankle bone high means you're keeping your from our original point, you're keeping your subtalar joint or your calcaneus supinated, right?
mm,
So as you're doing that, as you're keeping your inside ankle bone high, it's really hard to land on the inside of your calcaneus so that your foot inverts. Okay, so you're giving
mhm.
yourself a good landing pad if you're going to hit the heel. If your inside ankle bone's high, right? You're giving yourself a good chance to land properly. Um, that was just an aside there, but
Yeah. Uh, I'd like to kind of go back to the difference between eversion and inside ankle bone high, because if you go to this post that Movement Observer did, he has a really, really good example of people who are just arguing with him. It's funny because he has this guy. I wanted to go over this comment debate a little bit
sure.
and make some differentiations biomechanically. In the first picture, this is what I was kind of describing with that outside edge of the foot behavior, where you're kind of leaning all your weight onto that blade edge on the outside of your foot, versus where he's pressing into the fourth and fifth metatarsal pivot point and lifting his ankle bones high, his heels away. Those are two different biomechanical behaviors, right? And the one thing that people who don't really understand Goda and their biomechanical principles say is, hey, isn't this going to end up in an ankle sprain because you're doing so much ankle aversion? Well, first of all, do you know biomechanically why ankle aversions cause ankle sprains for people?
uh, because it's going beyond its limit. It's pulling on elastic, right? Like, okay, so the inside of the ankle has a deltoid ligament. It's much like the MCL, right? It's
Mm,
very, very tight. Like, try to take your heel and try to pull it to the inside with your hand. It's just going to be tight. So the ligaments on the inside are way, way, way tighter than the ligaments on the outside. So it's a lot easier for you to sprain like that than it is on the inside. However, you can do it if your toes up off the ground or there's enough force. But if your toes up off the ground and you move internally, uh, you can sprain the inside of your ankle. It's not impossible,
hmm
but by far it's more lateral sprains just because of the structure of the actual ankle. It's more loose.
so ankle aversion. It's funny because I again came from a bit of an Edo Portal method background, and I did a lot of long range tissue training when I worked with Lucas Aaron with range of strength, and I used to do extreme. Like I remember watching Edo Portal at one of his seminars, he would shock people because he would jump and he would land with his ankles completely, in aversion, and just land on that knife edge of his ankles completely bent. And like, everyone's like, oh my God, how'd you not roll your ankle? It's like, it's because I prepared them, right? So I started doing like weighted hinges with ankle aversion, completely loading and extending the tissues in there. And again, this is this idea of tissue preparation and training your tissues in over length, right? This is the idea that you can bulletproof your body by moving into these extended ranges of motion. But why would you do that if you could also, condition your body to move in these secure patterns that aren't going to cause the tissues to move out of place or overextend themselves in the first place?
Those are,
Go ahead.
I said, those are fantastic points. Like, um, really, here's the thing. When you roll over on your, like, do a lateral ankle sprain, it is definitely possibility no matter what state your ankles are in. If you aren't paying attention, you hit a rock, and like that happened to me last year, literally before an 8-kilometer race. I rolled my ankle because I had 3 dogs with me and I'm running through the forest and there was a rock in high grass. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what condition my ankles are in. I probably mitigated a lot of the force, but there's a scenario where it can happen, right? So it's not going to mitigate, no matter what you do, you're not going to 100% mitigate lateral ankle sprains, but you are going to mitigate ACL and, Achilles tears, right? So in terms of what you mentioned with Ido Portal and working that outside ligament, doing the hinges with your ankles way in inversion, or having the heels pointed in, that's valuable in that if you look at what movement observer is doing right now, if he was to just roll onto the top of his foot, you can absorb a lot of force like that. Okay. And that's a safe position to get out of. So meaning if you're in that position where your ankles are way out and you just drop your shin down to the floor and roll your body out of it, that is a safe, secure way to roll. So if I have a 200-pound guy coming to tackle me, I can just roll onto my shin if I'm conditioned to do that. You can't do it in the other direction. You can't do it when the weight is on the inside of your foot. You have only one option, and that is to have some tears somewhere, right? So I can always roll out of something towards the outside, but I can't do it towards the inside. So it's not secure.
Yeah, it's funny because I could always load that outside edge and I could condition the outside edge and the tissues there. And that was useful for me too, because I was trying to increase my ankle range of motion to get into the side splits. I wanted to be able to just have my feet pointed forward out as far as possible. And I needed an extreme amount of strength in ankle aversion, but I couldn't do the opposite. I couldn't go into extreme foot pronation and condition that inside ankle bone low as much as I could with that aversion mechanic. And I couldn't figure it out. I was trying to. I was like, but every time I did it, it felt like I was cranking something, and I was like, it felt biomechanically wrong to do it, to try and condition the tissues in the opposite direction. I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there goes the argument. Can you train your tissues to do anything, right? So a lot of people are like, there's no biomechanically perfect way to do something. It's only training your tissues. I don't buy that argument. There's a lot of people that do, a lot of smart people, but I think there is a better way to do things. And what Movement Observer is showing here, keeping inside ankle bone high, I'll post a video of how to roll out of, a sprain. Potential sprain, you can condition yourself to roll out towards the outside.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can't do it towards the inside. Again, it's locked up. That those ligaments are going to come with you. They're going to take the whole ankle and evert, right? Another point, and this is kind of one of my own theories, and I'm just exploring this. Feel free to comment or challenge me on it or whatever. But I think that you can train your ligaments to be elastic in a way that you can almost use inside ankle bone low as an elastic recoil to propel you up. Okay, you can use the actual ligaments in the inside of the ankle as a spring. Okay, so I'm just exploring this concept here, but like if you watch a lot of the long distance runners, a lot of the really thin, smaller guys who can, marathon runners basically, right? Kipchoge,
Mm-hmm.
you can see inside ankle bone low, right? You can see it. They're wearing big ass Nikes. They're wearing the Vaporflies and like the most conditioned or shoes that allow you to use like you can absorb a lot of force with those type of shoes, right? So I don't think
Mm-hmm.
they would have the same mechanics if they were running barefoot. So I think marathon runners may be a little bit of a red herring there, but I do observe a lot of inside ankle bone low behavior from marathon runners. I think Goda would say they could do better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where a linear observer of movement would say, no, look, they're all like most of them are doing it, or a lot of them are doing it. So that is the proper way to do it. And you're wrong and we're right about the linear versus rotary model. However, I do
Mm-hmm.
think there is a little bit of adaptation. Your tissues do adapt no matter what you do. Can you make ligaments adapt elastically? The old model, like how I learned it, they weren't really elastic. They weren't adaptable in an elastic way, but I think they are. I do now. So I think they can for some people, and I'm talking marathon runners and people who run a lot, who are thin, they can use that shock absorbing mechanism as a way to propel, and that is just a different mechanic. However, I still think inside ankle bone high, heel away, fourth and fifth metatarsal is a better way to do it. And in fact, I would say it's the only way to do it if you're barefoot. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to do it and actually absorb force. I go barefoot in the forest every single day when it's not, minus whatever here. There's still snow on the ground, but every day I can barefoot. I can only do it one way comfortably, and that's to absorb and rotary out.
Mm-hmm. And this is again, we're assuming, or not even assuming, we're discussing and exploring the idea of a rotary model of gait, a pivot point model of gait mechanics. I'm trying to find Killian. This is Killian Journett. I'm trying to see if there's some good video of his stride, because he's like one of the best ultra endurance mountain terrain runners. And I was looking a lot at the Tarahumara tribe, which are these Mexican ultra endurance runners as well. You can see him like absorbing some force. You can see his ankle dropping down, but this is uneven surface, right? Like look at you can see his ankle bone dropping here into the rocks. But
That's gonna happen no matter what. Like
yeah, so
that's what it's there for in terms
mhm,
of um that's what it's there for, to actually contour to terrain, let's say, right?
mhm.
But he's not going to let it just drop without a fight to get it back up. Otherwise, it would just drop like a somebody who you would see has a majorly dropped ankle, right? So
Right. So look at some of these strides and see how his ankle bone drops. Like here, you can see his knees start to come in. Would you still try to put pressure on the outside edge of your foot and still try to maintain, still try to return to that inside ankle bone
no,
high position, or what would
no,
you do in this situation?
because I run terrain not quite this crazy, but fairly crazy. It's like you are thinking of only one thing, and that's absorbing. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Absorption in this case is more important than
mhm.
inside ankle bone high or inside ankle bone low. Okay. I still try to land on the outside of my foot. I still try to do all the right things, but you're on some crazy terrain where, rocks are at wild angles. And I'm thinking more in this case when it's really wild like this, absorb, 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 and more like the parkour, send the energy to the next spot.
Mm.
Um, versus ankle mechanics because it's too crazy of a variable, right? But I still think that same thing. Heel away, like all the go to cues, it's just not possible or not the first priority in a situation where it's wild terrain.
Right. So you're saying, is this a situation where you would look at more force absorption and conditioning the foot to absorb those forces through the tissue? Would you do tissue conditioning? And if you knew that you were running on terrain would like that, would that be where doing things like the hinge with the extreme ankle aversion and maybe even training in inside ankle bone low positions, would you actually want to do tissue conditioning in that sense?
You could do a little bit. Like I go on rocks just when I'm on my walk, and I put my foot in different positions and I explore like the tibia and the ankle angles, and I put some weight through my foot and I feel the different areas, but I don't spend a ton of time on it, right? Um, it when you're barefoot walking, okay, and most people don't do this, so this is not applicable for most, but when you're doing it, you're already getting a lot of different angles, some wild angles that you can't mimic on a, a slant board or something that's just made to be clean, So you're getting a lot of conditioning when you're walking, 5,000, 10,000, but more steps, 15, 20,000, right? You're getting conditioning in many different areas. So for me, it becomes more of recovery work. Okay, so I do a little bit of the eversion work that you were describing, like the Ito Portel, go way over on your ankle, and I train the ankle to roll over, and for me to drop my shin to the ground and make that the absorption, so that my ankle doesn't take all the load. And that's basically what I do. There.
Yeah, we should make a video about that, because that's a pretty nuanced concept, and that would be something that's again, this is where some of the criticism about the inside ankle bone high behavior that Go gets as well. There's no way that you're going to be able to maintain that position 100% of the time. And like when you're doing things like ultra endurance races through, and the reason I'm talking about ultra endurance a little bit more is because that's my current area of fascination. Like, I'm fascinated with biomechanics. We talked about gait so much that I started getting into running, and so I started studying some of the best runners in the world, like the Tarahumara tribe, like Killian Journett, like Scott Jurek, like all these really, really good runners. And I'm watching their gait, and I'm noticing that hey, they might have really good back chain dominant behavior. They might have cool heel away behavior. A lot of the Tarahumara, they're all inside ankle bone low, and they all have I was talking to almost all of them. Some of them have heel away behavior, but almost all of them are, and these are people who
are these
run
untouched tribe, or is it?
So the Tarahumara are it's 50-50, right? Like, so the Tarahumara is a Mexican tribe, and they have some parts of their tribe that are closer to civilization. Like, some of them lost the ability to run ultra distances because commercial roads were put in, and they started getting drives, and they started working in these more developed towns. Others are closer to the middle of the desert, or near forests and stuff, and they're still running these mountain trails through the Copper Canyons, and they maintained their ability. But most of them use these sandals that are basically just tire rubber with leather straps around them. So these one of the guys, Manuel, if you can look up Luna sandals, and it's because one of the Tarahumara runners, Manuel Luna, in the book Born to Run, is a really, really amazing book. I highly recommend. It's probably one of my top 5 favorite books of all time now, which is saying something, because I've probably read close to 500 or 600 books now in my life, and that's Born to Run is now up there with one of my top 5. So definitely check that out. But one of these guys, he selects a certain part of the tire tread, and it's not super thick. It's just enough to absorb some of the force, and they just wrap it around, and they can still feel the ground, and they can still, obviously tire rubber is malleable enough that it's not stiff. Like, you don't have a stiff sole at all, but it's just enough to protect you from the rock. So these guys are running, 100-mile distances on a regular basis, 100-mile plus, using a thin layer of tire rubber and a leather strap. But when you watch their running behaviors, and at least the slow motion video that I tried to find on YouTube, played at 0.25 speed, a lot of them have this inside ankle bone low behavior, forming over the rocks. I didn't see too many people in the videos maintaining inside ankle bone high behavior.
Okay, so let's think of a thought experiment here. What would you like? Could you think of a time where the cue of inside ankle bone high wouldn't be beneficial? Can you think of a scenario there where the cue of being like, let's say it collapses and I go over a rock, that's fine, right? But if I cued to think about having my ankle bones high, and that means having that pressure there where you're feeling that, and it's a series of muscles pulling that, positions and muscles, right? Some muscular effort at first, and then after a while you can get that fascia to behave in that way. But my point is, can you think of a scenario where inside ankle bone high wouldn't be a good cue?
If you're trying to produce maximum dorsiflexion, that's a situation, the only situation that I could really think of. And
Where would you be doing that?
in a very specialized situation, I guess. Like,
Yeah,
you
so
know,
sorry, go
the
ahead.
well that's basically it, right? Like you when you're trying to achieve maximum dorsiflexion, you will have to start dumping towards the inside part of your foot, right?
Yes.
And the more you collapse your arch, the more dorsiflexion you can actually get. I used to be obsessed with maximum dorsiflexion because I wanted my knees to go over my toes when I squatted so that I could have more range when I was doing Olympic lifts, right? So as I'm developing more dorsiflexion, it's also one of the criticisms that a lot of GOTA coaches will have for Ben Patrick's knees over toes system. When you're doing these really, really long lunges, trying to get your knees as far over your toes as you can while keeping your heel on the ground, you can't help but have that inside ankle bone collapse so that you can get that extra range through the flexor hallucis longus, right? So if I'll pull up my screen again and just show it's like this is on the back side, and it does go towards that distal phalanx there. You need to basically you have to dump in onto the big toe side in order to release some of the tension there to get maximum dorsiflexion because of this. That's
Um,
the only like now you could follow up and say, okay, what's a situation where you would want to get maximum dorsiflexion? It's like, I don't fucking know.
yeah, so that's the reason I asked the question, right? It's because it inevitably goes back to you need it for lifting, right?
Mm,
Where in a real movement, uh, I'm going to pivot out before I need that maximum slow dorsiflexion. My
no.
synchronicity of my joints is not going to allow me to dump into the big toe if I don't need to. And that's another thing too, right? Like when you have good control, I may be able to like hit a rock and my ankle bone isn't just going to drop. I'm going to be able to pivot out of it and I'm going to be able to still keep the weight on the outside edge for the most part. Do you know what I
Mm,
mean? So I can start absorbing on rocks and on different terrain to maximize that outside edge, even though I'm dropping in a little bit. Okay, so it's
yeah.
not quite inside ankle bone low. It's more like my foot also absorbs too, right? Like so, if your foot absorbs, your ankle bone might drop in a little bit, but it's not dropping in maximally when you have good control. Okay,
Mm,
so you can get to the point of control where your inside ankle bone is high, and I can still have my foot come down and touch the first metatarsal, right?
mm.
So that's a weird scenario because for most people, the inside ankle bone will collapse. So I'm talking about, 0.1% of the population here. It's not people who train it big time, right? But it's possible to do. And now I like that because I know I'm secure, right? So
Right. So
there
and
is a
and it's
way to
funny
train.
because so the question that I would follow up with is, would it be, is it a bigger time investment to be a part of that 0.1% who has trained their inside ankle bone behavior to the point where you can basically be secure even in that situation, versus would it be easier to just do a little bit of tissue conditioning to make sure that you're secure when you fall out of those secure patterns? I still think it's worth training to have the best inside ankle bone behavior that you can, but I also don't think so. So actually, I was thinking, it's like, what's a situation where you would want maximum dorsiflexion? I can think of a resting squat as being an example, but you can still, like, so if you don't have um, the ankle mobility, we'll call it, to be able to sit with your heels flat in a resting squat position, even if you have nice deep bows and everything, like that's something that restricts my ability to rest in a squat, is the fact that I don't have dorsiflexion while I'm in my columns. So maybe I would sacrifice inside ankle bone high temporarily to gain the ankle mobility to be able to be in a resting squat, and then from the resting squat position, once I've gained that dorsiflexion ability, then I would start to push those ankle bones high from that position, and then I could adopt that morphology as well.
Well, I mean, yeah, like you can have the heel away, and the heel away will promote inside ankle bone behavior. And then you can use the size of chair to bring yourself closer to the ground. That's how I would do it. I'd want to start inside ankle bone high because that's really the difference. That's really the differentiating cue that Goda has. That's like, that's what separates the pivot point from the linear model. Because you see everyone in public doing the, just slapping their foot down. And that's what I'm seeing now. You know what I mean? When I watch people in public, it's just like no control. It's slapping down. Most people's feet are rigid, can't feel the ground, have been in shoes their whole life. This is not who to model around. Even athletes are the same way. When I was super athletic, when I was young, I was in soccer cleats and ski boots all the time. My feet were probably just terrible, right? So it's not exactly to model everyone in public and even athletes. It's like the go-to model is new, and it's an ideal to go for. And for me, the cue of inside ankle bone high really is the key to hitting the next level with the rotary motions. And I've felt the fruits. I feel it. I feel way more secure and better able to move with this inside ankle bone high cue. When I pivot in boxing, I keep on that blade edge of my foot and I keep that ankle bone high. I can go way, way faster in the pivot. I was listening to a Russian boxer, like the old Soviet boxing from like the 70s, 80s era is very different from American boxing. They use a lot more mechanical advantage versus American boxing, which is athletic, twitchy, like very stylistic, right? The Soviet boxing, once you understand it, it's beautiful, right? Because it's all about synchronicity in the body. It's very, very, like, if you don't get it timed correctly, you can't do the maneuvers, right? So in that case, I was listening to a guy, it was straight in Russian, had like dubbed over, and he's like talking about keeping the ankle bones rigid. He's like, you can't do anything unless the ankle bones are rigid. They must be rigid. Otherwise, you're letting the tissues in your body absorb. When your ankles are rigid, you're using the elasticity from the ligaments, which is what my theory behind about 20 minutes ago was. You keep your ankle bones rigid, and that allows you to almost endlessly bounce. So a lot of these guys can bounce for, Usyk, Alexander Usyk, Lomachenko, who do this style, can bounce the whole fight, 12 rounds. And we're even better for amateur boxing and real fighting because it's quicker and faster and uses gate mechanics as the way to box, okay? But as an aside, the cue there for this guy was ankle bones rigid, right? Like, it's a very, very important cue, even in boxing, to transfer force. He's not letting the ankle bones collapse. Where in American boxing, a lot of MMA guys, you'll see a flat foot, okay? And that's going to promote, you have to use your muscle, you have to use your force. And joints are going to be impinging. You can last for a while, but like, if you want smooth movement till you're old, I would adopt the ankle bone high rotary model. And it's not theory, guys. You can do this. It's like, I can show you video in slow motion of me doing it. Like, a lot of the guys don't even believe it's a thing now. They're like, no, that doesn't fit in my paradigm. That doesn't exist. It's like, yeah, it does. It exists. So you can do one or the other. And you can tell me it's wrong if you want. I'm willing to listen, but I haven't really heard this debated in a sophisticated way yet. Like, it's mostly, there's no model for this. It doesn't make any sense. And since all the top guys are using the other model, then let's just throw it away and not even talk about it.
Yeah. Again, the reason that people will dismiss it is because they'll look at the biomechanics. They'll look at the biomechanical structure, or not the biomechanic, the anatomical structure, and deduce biomechanics from it. Right? Like, that's the big thing, is it's not based on actually observing movement or even testing movement themselves. It's just being like, okay, well, this is the structure of the joint, and therefore it doesn't behave in the way that you're describing it's behaving. And I think that's go ahead.
I can give you a specific example. So in the anatomical model, when you're supinating, your bones of your foot, the metatarsals, become rigid. And then when you pronate, when your foot comes down towards the big toe, then your metatarsals can splay out and you can absorb force, right? So in the linear model, when you land, your foot is supinated, it's rigid, it's getting that, and it's hard to push off power, right? And then you come down and it's absorbing the force. And that's the part that absorbs the force, right? In this model is coming down and absorbing it. The pronation, the bones splay out, you can absorb the force, then it resupinates in order for you to gain the power, right? So to me, that is an anatomical assumption that that's what you need to do. So when you're debating this, a lot of the guys will go, well, then how do you absorb force? Because you can't, you're not going to pronate because that's the force absorption phase. And we're like, but the force absorption comes from the rotary action, just like, when a parkour guy jumps and rotate or rolls out of it, that's a rotary action to absorb the energy. But it doesn't compute because it's like the absorption I was taught is that it has to be the pronation because the bones splay apart and there's no other way around it, right? Where that's almost like kind of like you're proving your own model using your own model, where you know what I mean. So yeah, that's a right there. That was taking the bones. I can go on a table, I can pull someone's foot into a supination and it will feel rigid, and I pull the person's foot on a table into pronation and it does feel loose. Makes sense there. However, when you watch it happen, which one would you rather do? Would you rather go the inside ankle bone high, Ed Reed, Michael Jordan, beautiful movers are doing it all over the place, or do you want to go inside ankle bone low and absorb using your metatarsals and your collapsing in just enough on the dome to pop back up? Which one do you want?
Yeah, and again, what's interesting is you're still relying on elastic recoil to propel you forward in the pivot point system, but the elastic energy that you're storing is up the entire chain of that. That's where the go to bow comes from. You're loading this bowing energy that has elastic recoil all up. Like, think about what's a thicker tissue to be loading your plantar fascia or your IT band. Like, you're going to have more elastic energy propelling you forward if you pivot that energy that's loading in the bow all the way up that side chain of your body and then spiraling out through your spine and through that pivot point in the fourth and fifth metatarsal. They're proposing the same mechanism of propulsion forward, kind of. Some people are proposing, like you said, that muscle lengthening idea, but if you're basically, it's like, what would you rather load? Would you rather load an entire chain of fascia and set a bow with your entire structure, or would you rather just load your plantar fascia? And for me, the obvious answer is just you want to load the chain as much as you can and not rely on this small patch of fascia on the bottom of your foot.
I always say, like, what makes more sense okay, so we've been talking about marathon runners and people who move forward, and you can have inside ankle bone low. However, when you start rotating, like let's say you're a running back in the NFL, what do you want in terms of lateral stability? I shouldn't even say the word stability. Lateral motion, cutting in front of a 300-pound guy who's trying to take you out. It's like you need that ankle bone to be high at that point. I don't think anybody would argue, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that the inside ankle bone should drop low as you're cutting hard, okay? Because obviously your tibia is going to go with it, and you're rotating your tibia at speed towards the internal motion. Like, it just doesn't make sense in terms of the knee. You're going to get shredded. So
high-speed mega loaded valgus. Like,
so does anyone want to debate that you shouldn't have your inside ankle bone high at that point where you're cutting at full speed? I don't know, right? Like, I haven't seen a good argument for that. I see a good argument or a decent argument for straight line running, that maybe you can use it as a elastic absorption or something like that, and it's not a huge issue. However, when you're cutting, it's a huge issue. When you're pivoting, it's a huge issue. Yeah, so that's just where I'm at with that one.
And likewise, I mean, this is in terms of the actual anatomical structure. It's interesting because when we were looking at that joint, I could even see where like you said, it's not exactly a ball and socket joint, but when you look at the behavior of the ankle, I mean, stick your leg out and rotate your foot around. You can move your foot in all kinds of directions. It can behave like a ball and socket in the same way. Like, I can't, rotate my hip much farther than I can rotate my ankle necessarily. It behaves in this gyroscopic way, even if the anatomical structure makes it look like a hinge joint. You have the access to these different nuanced ranges of motion, and that's why when we're talking about an inside ankle bone high behavior, there are multiple actions happening at the foot and ankle complex. It's not just eversion, and that's why it's not going to end in an ankle sprain necessarily. So I want that's ultimately. I hope that for those who are listening, I know we got a little technical and we got a little complex. It was nice actually. I feel like this is like one of our more technical episodes after a little bit of a hiatus from like getting into the real technical details of some of the stuff. But hopefully the people who are listening kind of got an understanding of where we're coming from when we're making a differentiation between ankle eversion and inside ankle bone high, and why when we say the ankle behaves like a ball and socket, we're not saying that the ankle joint is a ball and socket joint, but we're saying it behaves like one. And you can even make a case that certain parts of that complex look like a ball and socket.
Absolutely. Here's a little bit of a thought experiment. You have the ball and socket at the hip, right? It acts like a ball and socket when it's healthy. When it's not healthy, it stops acting like a ball and socket, right? So let's go back down to the ankle. You definitely don't have a pure ball and socket where the talus meets the tibia, because there's literally a restriction on both sides from the malleolus. It's not a perfect restriction. I can still tilt a little bit. However, the bottom, the subtalar joint, has tilt. So what if I combined those two, and that combines into a ball and socket like behavior? So I would say it's kind of like a restricted ball and socket joint at the top, at the ankle more piece where the tibia meets the talus. Then at the bottom, it's more of a hinge. Combine the two, it acts very, very, very much like a ball and socket. The point of the healthy ball and socket or the unhealthy one at the hip versus the ankle is that I don't think a lot of people display healthy ankle mechanics. I don't see it very much missing from society, right? So I think their ankles are behaving much like an arthritic hip. Okay, so
well, and I mean, if you think about how much we outsource our feet and ankles power to shoes, to the springiness of shoes, or to the padding of shoes. We're almost always wearing shoes when we're outside, when we're walking long distances. Most people's 10,000 steps are done through some sort of dysfunctional footwear that disconnects us from our foot's natural biomechanics. If you did that to your hip, if we had like some sort of like mechanism around our hip to like assist us propelling forward. I mean, you can even look at chairs, for example, like stuffing your hips into a 90-degree angle or worse. Sitting in chairs all the time when you're in the front chain, like that creates basically dysfunction at the hip level as well. So you have dysfunctional hip behavior, you have dysfunctional foot behavior. Most people don't use their feet the way that feet were designed to be used. We have so many nerve endings on the bottom of our feet to be able to differentiate between different terrain. Like maybe like one of the centers of our body that has like the most nerve endings is on our feet. So and that deadens for a lot of people. That's why you do so much barefoot walking, even in the mountains on trails, right? Like you start to regain that sort of sensibility in your feet.
Well, the importance of this can really not be overstated. Like, try to actually go out and walk on uneven terrain in your bare feet. And I'm not talking about walking on the grass in your backyard. I'm talking about going over rocks, like doing all that sort of terrain. And you'll find that your feet are ultra weak. You can't feel anything, and things are all over the place. Okay. So after I've been barefoot walking for probably 4 years now, consistently, and you cannot walk the same in your bare feet on terrain that you can with your shoes. You have to change your mechanics, and your mechanics become a lot more nuanced and careful. Okay, I can feel my body much better. It's much less jarring because I can't be jarring. Okay, I can be jarring with Nike Vaporflies on. I can smash my heel down, no big deal, right? Like, and your mechanics do change when this happens. These mechanics are what everyone's displaying because everybody's in these casts. Everybody from a young age is in these casts. So it's not only the ankle behavior, it's how you absorb shock through the body is going to change too. So even like let's say a tribesman who does run a lot and who has to go through that terrain, they'll probably absorb from the top, like from the ankle up, much differently as well. Okay. And that goes back to the point where if I watch somebody run, the first thing I actually look for, and I don't say this enough, is how are you absorbing? Are you smashing down? Are you quiet? Are your feet dragging? Am I hearing am I hearing a thud, 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 or am I hearing something smooth? Because even if somebody is, maybe they're duck footed or the ankle's collapsing, but if I don't hear them coming, I'm like, okay, you're still absorbing, you're helping yourself out. You're that, what I guess Naughty would say fluid, right? Versus a thud, even though technically, if I saw like a GOTA runner, somebody who looks GOTA, you rarely hear them stomp. I've never heard one. Okay. So they go hand in hand.
Well, because you're pivoting the energy before you can absorb it, right? And this is even in Born to Run, they say the best runners leave no footprints. And then when he actually went to the Tarahumara tribe, he was like, these guys are barely leaving any tread in the trails that they're running. Like they were so light, even though they did, like I said, there's still the ankle bone low behavior and stuff. They're not perfectly GOTA necessarily, but they were so light on their feet. And that's, for me too, like I like having I had this metal water bottle that I was using on my treadmill. And when the metal was clanging, I knew I was stomping too hard and I wasn't pivoting properly. So I would adjust my stride to the point where I would get light enough that I wouldn't hear that metal clanging on the water bottle. That's the best case scenario.
Very interesting. There's a lot of elements to this, right? It's like how high are you bouncing up? It's like, is your head over your foot? Again, back to Soviet boxing. This is the next level concept for you nerds out there. When you're bouncing in the Soviet boxing style, okay, the up down, up down, up down, you're pushing your power as you absorb. You don't push your power when you're too high up. So on Instagram the other day, I had when people double bounce you on the trampoline, it's all about timing. You have to time it out properly or you absorb the force. In this Soviet boxing style, as your foot comes down, you absorb the force. That's where you press your gas on the muscles, and that will propel you into the punch. Where I was playing with this running, I'm like, oh, when I absorb, I can pulse just as I land and be much more absorb way better and use the elastic recoil much better than if I was to not time that out. However, I'm just playing with that now. I usually don't give insights on what I'm currently doing, except that one became, it was pertinent to the topic and pretty interesting. I'm playing with it currently. I haven't, perfected it at all.
Well, and that's, I think we're both explorers of movement first and foremost. We're always thinking about it. We're always researching it, but beyond just like researching the technicalities and the academic literature of it, we're just experimenting with movement and making our own discoveries. Like running right now is my big point of exploration because I've never been a good runner. I've always been between 180 to 210 pounds based on, whether I was powerlifting or CrossFitting or getting more into gymnastics, but I've never been able to get to a point where I can run for more than 5 minutes without getting winded. And now I'm, doing 6 minute or 10-minute mile pace, like 6 miles per hour pace without getting winded, breathing through my nose, because my mechanics are more sound. And like, I was the type of person that was always so stiff from doing everything that I would like grunt to like, to get out of a chair or to like, I had all these aches and pains and was constantly tight. By making these behavioral changes and playing with the dynamics and the nuances, it's like, I can run I ran, I think something like 40 miles over the last like 10 days, give or take, which is a lot for me. Like I've never, like, again, not a runner at all, but using running now as my way to explore with like, I'm thinking about the way that my foot rolls off of the ground now, the same way that when I was 16, jumping off buildings, trying to roll this energy out of these, jumping off a building. You do a lot of boxing, you do a lot of striking, you do a lot of that stuff. And so this nuance, this ability, that it's all it is mediums for us to explore timing and the way that the body reacts. And so we're explorers first and foremost. If anyone who is listening to some of our ideas and are just like, this is outright wrong, you guys are way off the mark, or you have other interesting perspectives that you want to add on to the discussion, you can always join us live on nofilter.net. We had a couple people joining live today. Thank you guys for listening. This is the Art of Move episode 36, which is kind of crazy to think about. We're into 36 episodes. And again, audience is slowly growing. So for everyone who has been listening up to this point, thank you so much. For anyone who's new, who's listening to the podcast, you can follow me at The Body Moves on Instagram and Will at The Art of Move. We both post a bunch of different content there as well. But this is kind of where you're going to get the best content from us, the best free content from us. We will be launching a very, very in-depth course shortly that kind of sums up a lot of the concepts that we've discussed on the podcast in a more practical application. So if you guys are interested in learning more about that, you can send us a DM, but keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you so much for listening, guys. You can support this podcast by either watching us live on nofilter.net, sending us a personal message, letting us know what you want to listen to next, and then liking and subscribing on whatever platform you are on. Thanks so much for listening, guys. We'll see you next episode.
Thanks for listening, guys. Let movement be your medicine.